Today we're going to be learning about the scientific method, and we're going to be focusing on the parts of an experiment, specifically on variables, and also we're going to talk about control groups and experimental groups. I will let you know during the presentation when you need to stop and take notes. Okay, so today we're going to be taking notes on the foldable called Parts of an Experiment that we cut and pasted into our notebook in class today. Notes should be written right above the term, so if we're going to do, when we do independent variable, you want to write your notes in this area right here, right above the term, and then keep flipping your pages up as we go. Now mine looks a little different from yours because I had to edit it. I changed it a little bit, so just ignore that. A variable is a factor in an experiment that can change or be manipulated. And there are three different types of variables used in a scientific experiment. The first is an independent variable, also known as an input variable. This is the factor that you will be changing, and you can only have one independent variable in your experiment. The second is a dependent variable, also known as an output variable. The third are control variables, also known as constants. So these are the three types of variables here. You have independent variable, dependent variable, and control variables. This is really the only page where you have to take notes. I want you to write down the sentence in the green right here for independent variable, the sentence in the blue for dependent variable, and the sentence in the red for control variables. You won't have to write any other notes down until when we talk about control groups and experimental groups. The independent variable is the one factor that you change on purpose. It's really your reason for conducting the experiment. It's what you want to test. The dependent variable is the factor that you measure at the end of your experiment or throughout your experiment. Your control variables are the many factors that must not change to ensure a fair test. And I'm going to go through all three of those variables with examples now. Remember, the independent variable is the thing that you decide to change in your experiment. It's what you're testing. You are only allowed to change one thing, so you can only have one independent variable. In this first example, you want to investigate how a weight affects the length of an elastic band, a rubber band. You decide to apply weight of different masses. So you can start with a light weight, then add a medium weight, and try a heavy weight, and see how the weight affects the length of the rubber band here. You are changing the weight, therefore weight is your independent variable. Okay, this is another example. Say you're investigating how the rate of cooling of a beaker depends on the initial temperature. So you're going to decide on the initial temperature. So you may start it at the water at, just below boiling point, or whatever temperature. You can apply however much heat you want to. You decide the temperature. So the temperature in this experiment is the independent variable. The dependent variable is the variable that changes as a result of changing your independent variable. It's the variable that you measure, the result. In the first example, we were investigating how a weight affects the length of an elastic band. What you're measuring is the length of the rubber band as you change the amount of weight. Therefore, the length of the rubber band is your dependent variable. It's what you're measuring. It's the results of changing your independent variable, which was the weight. We were investigating the rate of cooling a beaker of water and to see if it depends on the initial temperature. And you're going to measure the temperature every minute or so as it cools. So because of that, you're measuring the temperature. Temperature is the dependent variable. So the third type of variable are the control variables. And these are all the variables that you must not change to make sure that your experiment is a fair test. They need to stay constant. So example 1, we talked about investigating how the weight affects the length of an elastic band. So your control variable should be that you're using the same elastic band the whole time. You're using the same scale. You're using the same setup, the same ruler. You're not moving your materials around, changing locations. Those are all examples of control variables. In the example with the water, you want to make sure that you use the same beaker, use the same amount of water. So if you're using 100 milliliters of water, you should use 100 milliliters every time you test this. It should be located in the same position in the room. You should be in the same room temperature. You want to control everything that you can to ensure that you have a fair test. Okay, so now those were the three variables: independent variable, dependent variable, and control variable. But now we're going to talk about control groups and experimental groups. And you want to write down the definitions right here. Okay, so under that tab there in your foldable, you want to define experimental group, writing this sentence right here in the green, and then you want to define control group and write that sentence there in the red. If you need more time, you can pause the video now and then just press play when you're ready. So experimental groups is a part of your experiment that's exposed to the conditions of the experiment. So it's exposed to the independent variable. So it's exposed to whatever it is you want to test. The control group is not exposed to the experiment conditions. It's kind of like the group that's most like its normal conditions. And I'll give you an example. So the importance of control groups is that they're used as a comparison. So the researcher, a scientist, or you doing an experiment in class, you can compare your experimental group to your control group to see if there was a difference. And that'll help you form a conclusion and figure out your results from your experiment. So let's look at this example question. Say you want to know if pill bugs, I know they're kind of gross, eat food other than hosta leaves, which is their preferred food source. So they prefer to eat hosta leaves, but you want to know if they'll eat grass. So you would set up an experiment here. So this is a picture of the experiment. So this is the control group right here, because you put pill bugs in a little jar with hosta leaves. This is their preferred food source. And then you set up another experiment, the other part of your experiment, which is your control group, and you put the pill bugs in a jar with the same amount of soil, okay, same type of jar, holes poked in the lids on both, okay, everything else are controlled, all these other variables are controlled variables. The one thing that you changed is the food source, which is grass instead of hosta leaves. So you would observe this experiment, and you would collect your data, and you can compare how much grass is left to how much of the hosta leaves are left to see if the pill bugs will actually eat the grass blades if they had to. Okay, so that's just an example. But we'll do more examples in class tomorrow. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example now to go over. I'm not going to give you the answers until you get to class tomorrow, but I want you to take a guess, give it your best shot, and record your answers on your note sheet or your foldable on the tab labeled example. And then I also want you to submit them on the Emoto online poll below this video. Okay, so here's the example. You want to know if eating Snickers will make you a faster runner. To test this, you decide to time yourself run once around a track without eating Snickers. And then you return to the same track the next day, eat the Snickers, and time yourself run the same distance. So you want to think about what your independent variable is. Remember, the independent variable is the variable that you change. It's what you're testing in your experiment. So in this experiment, what are you testing? What are you changing from the first run around the track to the second run? And then the dependent variable is what you're measuring. So what are you going to be measuring at the end of the experiment to see if the independent variable caused an effect? That would be your dependent variable, what you're measuring. So give it a try, and don't forget to take the poll, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.